That's great.
Yeah.
So let's now I know Jeanette's got all these questions. So just Jeanette,
No,
just chime
it's
in anytime.
okay.
But I want to ask you about, because you're the creator of Amazing Women's Day, which is coming up on the April 16th this weekend.
Hmm.
But I would really like to get a sort of a snapshot of your story up until the time you came to create Amazing Women's Day.
Okay, well, that was my first question, so there you go.
See, I don't even need, you know.
Well, and I have a brand new book out. It's called Amazing Woman, What's Your Story? And it essentially was written specifically because I believe we all have a story. And I believe that many times our story and the ways in which we relate to our story is leading us to this greater purpose that's all just, longing to be expressed in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So for me personally, what happened is in 1999, I received a phone call, suddenly, completely unexpectedly, that just shook me to my core, and that was that my mom had died. And then just a few months later, I got the word that I had a diagnosis of lymphoma. And then a few months after that, my dad died. So within 18 months, I had this, what I call a wave of awakening, but a lot of experiences that was leading me to a greater purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, I had been running a promotional marketing agency. So when the call came in that my mom had died, I literally got on a plane and I went back to Evansville, Indiana, which is where I'm from. Anybody watching that's from Indiana, sending a big
Hi.
shout out. But Evansville, Indiana is where I was, living and had grown up. So I flew back from LA to Evansville, and I began to explore the story of my mom's life. I wanted to know from her friends. I wanted to know from our family. I wanted to know from my brothers, their point of view, and what did they see my mom's life to be like.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to write that story.
You mean from everybody's point
From
of view?
everybody's point of view, I began to write that story. And now you have to remember that I was not a writer,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the furthest thing from my mind that I would be a writer. I was a promotional marketer. I ran a big marketing agency in Hollywood for television film studios, but I was compelled, that deep longing, that deep drive that said there's something greater here that's wanting to come out and be expressed. So I didn't know where to start that other than to start by interviewing everyone that knew my mom. So I spent like 24 hours writing this incredible story of my mom's life that ended up being the eulogy that I delivered at her celebration, at her funeral that day. And it was just, I didn't realize that was the first Amazing Woman story that I'd ever told until just, honestly, just a few years ago. And I was speaking to in an interview or speaking to a group of people, and I was talking about all the people that I'd interviewed and all the stories that I've told and all the people that I've coached to help them tell their stories. And I realized in that moment that the very first story that I ever told, the very first interview that I ever did, was that around my mom. And so what a dedication. And through that, it led to this desire to create a day on which all women honor their story. I realized that the ways in which we tell our story impacts our future so greatly that the way in which we're interpreting our story and telling our story in this moment is going to make a difference in the way we see our future and the way we take action in the world and the way we see our ability to be successful.
So this is us as human beings, the way we tell our personal story to ourselves in our head. Is that the story you're talking about?
Exactly, or tell it to others, or describe our experiences, or give ourselves this opportunity to set a goal or set a vision for ourselves. Many times we limit ourselves just simply because we've not seen the full impact, the full value of the story that we're experiencing.
Just like It's a Wonderful Life, right?
Yes,
Jenny's-
very much like that, very much.
Okay, Jeanette, your turn.
Well, my turn is we have so many amazing women, and yet a lot of women don't realize just how amazing they are. In your opinion, why is that? Why is it that so many women are reluctant to see how amazing they are?
Well, I think that it's not just women, it's men too, that many times we get caught up in looking at our failures or looking at what we consider to be lack or looking at ways we've let ourselves down or maybe we've interpreted ways that we've let others down, and then we begin to see ourselves and identify ourselves in a story or a description of possibilities, it's very limiting, a very narrow view. So we have to, in my new book, Amazing Woman, What's Your Story, I literally take us on a journey of how to bring out the real heart and soul, the real power of your story. Because it's an excellent question, because many times we just get stuck. We get stuck in an old story, and we begin to over-identify by that story to where we can't see anything past that story.
Okay, I got to ask you then, because people do get stuck in those
Yes.
negative stories about themselves. And I mean, what do you tell somebody who is really stuck there, and they're finding it hard to find a way through or out of that? Like, what bit of advice do you have to people?
Well, the
that are in
first
that
step, I
situation?
would ask you to tell the story in a new way. Just simply stop telling the story in the way that you've chosen to tell it. And if you were to choose a new way to tell that story, how would you tell it to me? How would you tell it to yourself? If you were to choose ways that would stretch you beyond how you've identified or how you've gotten caught and really become comfortable. I call it being comfortable in our discomfort. Many times we get so comfortable in identifying ourselves in things that create discomfort for us that we don't know that there's any way out. So if you were to retell that story, how could you tell it in a way that would be more empowering to yourself? And then I'd ask you to do it yet again and again and again. And before you know it, what happens is that you see that you can shift a story anytime you choose and see value in it, see wisdom in it, see strength in it, see possibilities in it. And I call it playing with fresh curiosity. How can I look at this in ways that really expands me and the way I see my future simply by changing the way I tell my story?
Okay, so the book, it's brand new. I'm just going to hold it up.
And it's a giveaway today for the
Oh,
first
yeah, it's a
caller in
giveaway.
at it's worth $24.95.
204-9723 to get this book, Amazing Woman, What's Your Story? But Marsh, so you just talked about the importance of telling your story and telling it in a way that's going to actually help you. What's in this book specifically? What is this book? Who's it for? What do they do with it? What are they going to get out of it?
The book is designed as a step-by-step guide that will take you into the heart and soul of your story. So what will happen is it's a study guide, and you pick it up, and we all have stories. Am I right on that? Everybody has a story of their life. I just went to a hair salon on my way in because I literally got off of an airplane.
Well, your hair looks fabulous.
Thank you. A red eye this morning, and I said, we've got to go to a hair salon, and I went in, and the minute I sat down, she said, I have an incredible story to tell. I have an incredible life experience. And it was just natural for her to begin to tell me her story. And so I believe we all have those stories. And so the question we would have for ourselves is, how empowering? How have I interpreted that story? Am I interpreting it in such a way that it moves me into a future that I'm really visioning for myself? Or am I caught there in it? Have I over-identified with some experiences that I'm struggling getting out of? The book itself will take you through those exercises. But then what I love the most about the book is that not only will you have the exercises, but you'll read firsthand stories of women who did shift their stories, who did use the exercises, who did find their way to a deeper wisdom or a deeper clarity or a deeper sense of empowerment, and opened up a new fresh future because of that. So when they started to see that every experience carries an incredible value to us, and I love the mantra that I use often is, how is life loving me in this moment? If we can imagine that and remember that, every experience is bringing us something so powerful for us to learn from. And how can we interpret it? The book helps us do that, and then through the stories of incredible, amazing women who have used those principles to shift their own life, we begin to see how we can do that for ourselves as well.
Are these always personal stories? Because we're individuals, but we're in a larger world where historical events often overtake the stories of our personal lives. When bad things happen to good people and that sort of thing. What can you tell people about how, when they find themselves in that kind of situation?
In those types of situations. And
Yeah.
and I'm not, please don't interpret that I'm making light of anyone's life story, because my own life story is filled with all kinds of very challenging experiences that took a lot of insight and a lot of inner searching through the principles that I teach in the book to shift. When life happens and we cannot understand how can we be experiencing this, many times what happens is we can find the golden nuggets out of it that will allow us to teach what we've learned from that experience. Mm-hmm. So if we've lived through incest, or if we've lived through abuse, or if we've lived through serious health challenges, or if we've lived through experiences in our world, with our weather that we've had, and the incredible losses that so many of our brothers and sisters have experienced, when we can begin to look at that and ask ourselves, how can I learn from this? I think what's coming to mind, one of the best stories that I had is, I wrote the book on the female firefighters of New York City. I went in right after 9/11, and there's, out of 114-year history of firefighters in New York City, there's only fewer than 30 women, 26 women that serve FDNY. So after 9/11, I wanted to go in, I wanted to explore their lives. I wanted to understand, who are these women? How are they interpreting their lives? How did they find the courage, the strength, the resilience to stay with it, to become a female firefighter in a 114-year history? And these are the first women firefighters. How's that happening? So I went in right after 9/11, and it was an incredible experience to sit with them, having had that loss. It's a firefighter lives in a home, the firehouse, with a community. So it's very, very much a family. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine that many of the firefighters that I interviewed, these incredible women, had lost everyone in their firehouse. Some of them had lost everyone but one or two in their firehouse. That would be like losing an entire family. Mm-hmm. That would be like, can you imagine that experience?
Well, actually, I can, to some extent, because I had family that lost their entire family.
Wow.
Wiped out in the war, the Holocaust,
yes,
and stuff. And so I heard stories like that all the time, and I saw the effects of it.
Yes.
And yes, it's devastating. But how they carry on and move forward
that's
where
the power is.
Yes.
So it's like when I went back a year after right after 9/11, I went spent a year, and then at the year anniversary of 9/11, I went back to New York, went into the firehouses again, sat with the women once again, and I asked one of the incredible questions that changed my point of view was that, how do you make sense? I know that your best friend was lost in 9/11. And now you're celebrating, in parades, and you're celebrating it without him. And how does that feel? And she said, Marsh, you know what? If we do not take the time to understand that every experience is carrying power for us, then we lose the experience itself. Carries the power always. Instead, we can take the power out. We can learn the wisdom from the experience. We can turn it into some inspired action. We can celebrate our life in new ways. And if we don't do that, then the experience goes lost.
Yes, I totally can understand that and relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so you're in town for, I don't know, a week anyway. Or almost a week or something like that. Yes. And because Amazing Women's Day is this Saturday, right?
It
and
is.
I want to ask about that one. I'm thrilled, delighted to be a media sponsor of the event, and I wanted you to tell everyone today, what is this event? Like, first of all, why did you create it, and what can we expect to see from it? And I want to remind everyone that you're giving also there's a bonus to go to the event for $197. It's equal to $197 plus HST Canadian, and you're going to have to tell everyone how they can get that.
Yes, okay. I will, but I'll first answer your question. That in 99, when my mom passed, I was inspired to create a movement among women, because what I realized then is there was a value within our life story, and was a value, feminine values, that were yet to be truly embraced in our community as women. And those feminine values, like community, like collaboration, like deeper connection, was really, we were longing for that. I know I was longing for that. So I created a grassroots movement, and it's called Amazing Women's Day. And we started in the U.S. We started in 10 U.S. cities in 2002. 2002, we received a congressional proclamation. We were celebrated in all